everybody, and welcome to part three of our food sovereignty in Puerto Rico series, where we explore how the history of agriculture in Puerto Rico, how colonialism and U.S. imperialism destroyed the industry, and what that means for the culture, the economy, the people, and what we want to see in the future. So we gave you part one and part two, which took us through 1898, following the Spanish-American War and the U.S. takeover of the island, and up through the 20th century, all into the 2010s. And today we're going to look at what's going on the island right now, what's going to happen in the future, and some incredible organizations that are doing work on the ground to help improve the food and agriculture sector in PR. So again, we are here with Julio, who is a scholar of this topic and we will be discussing part three today. So, Julio, question number one for part three. How is colonialism reflected in food and agriculture sector today?
Yeah, man, our food and agricultural sector are heavily colonized. When I talk to people about Puerto Rico being a colony of the United States, I describe it as a colony of labor exploitation and consumption, right? When people think of most colonial or neo-colonial projects around the world, you typically think about sites of large resource extraction, right? Like what we're seeing in the Congo, but Puerto Rico is small in terms of size and mineral resources. So you don't have these huge deposits of raw ores or large tracts of land where you can have massive monocultures like you have in parts of Central America and South America, right? Where these places basically just produce food for the empires and they don't contribute anything to the local economy. So instead, Puerto Rico has a very large population relative to the size of the archipelago, right? A large population that is exploited by the service industry at home, by the US military, which is the only reason why we were granted citizenship, right? So they could draft us and use us as in the front lines. And then we are heavily exploited in low paying industries in the US, right? So once we immigrate to the United States, the majority of us are stuck in low paying jobs. By colony of consumption, I refer to a large population that is forced to consume nothing but American products, right? Puerto Rico is a huge market for the United States, which despite being very poor and very poorly paid, they have to buy everything at much higher prices than people in the United States, right? So we're bombarded by American products, including food, right? We've mentioned before how much of the food that's consumed in Puerto Rico comes from the United States. This is why the cabotage laws or the Jones Act are so beneficial to the U.S. economy, right? So one step that we need to take to abolish the Merchant Marine Act or the Jones Act is, I mean, if the U.S. wants to keep it and continue to apply it to the states, fine. But this is something that the Puerto Rican government and the people of Puerto Rico need to fight against, right? So in order to decolonize our food and agriculture, we need to abolish the Merchant Marine Act, right? This will enable Puerto Rico to import food and other goods from other countries at much lower prices, not to mention import healthier food. We all know how terrible American food is. The American food industry is heavily unregulated when it comes to chemicals, pesticides, antibiotics, and other toxic additives that go into our food. If you look at some of the same multinational corporations here in the United States selling similar products abroad, their ingredients and the way that they produce those products are completely different because many of the chemicals and a lot of the stuff that's found in our food here in the United States is banned in other countries, right? So the Americanization of the Puerto Rican diet has severely affected the health of Puerto Ricans, right? And trapping us into this cycle of dependence on medical treatments from the United States, which is another way that Puerto Ricans are exploited by food colonialism, right? Give us shitty food, we have shitty health, then we have to depend on your medicine, right? So it's kind of like this vicious cycle. So ending the Jones Act or these cabotage laws would also free up millions of dollars per year to invest in the local economy and local agriculture. Another thing that we have to consider is that the majority of the federal funds that Puerto Rico receives for food and nutrition programs actually goes towards assistance programs or PAN, which is the Puerto Rican version of food stamps, basically, instead of developing and investing that money into local agriculture. Now, in a country where the median income is much lower than that of the poorest US state, it's undeniable that food assistance programs are necessary. But when you're importing everything from the USA, that federal aid ends up going back into the pockets of American corporations rather than stimulating the local economy.
Yeah, I think that last point is super, super important. It's something that a lot of people don't realize. They'll just be like, oh, they just want government assistance, blah, blah, blah. Like, but that cycle, they don't see the full picture. And really quick, anecdotally, on the idea of like US food being poisonous and things like that, I have some relatives through marriage, on my uncle's side, in from Mexico City, and they were talking about how the Mexican government is fighting U.S. corporations, agriculture corporations, right now because the Mexican government made a lot of laws to prevent the importation of American corn, and these companies are very, 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 very upset about that. So it's a similar situation, not similar, but kind of idealistically the same situation where
No,
this
I would say they're similar, right? Because we're dumping corn onto these markets, right? Destroying the local corn market. Sorry, I cut you off, but
no, you're good. Yeah,
I want it's very similar.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just like taking like that all this poison, they just want to export into certain areas that so that they become dependent on these specific seed types that are patented in the US. Um, it's very exploitative, obviously. Um, but moving on. So number two, or our second question of part three, what are some organizations or individuals on the ground helping improve the food and agriculture sector in Puerto Rico right now?
There's some really exciting things happening in Puerto Rico right now. And even though we have to wait for things to change a little bit with the cabotage laws and the government incentivizing local agriculture, et cetera, there's a lot of people in Puerto Rico that have recognized the importance of food sovereignty, particularly after the vulnerabilities that were exposed in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. We have organizations like el Centro de Apoyo Mutuo en Caguas, which basically began as a student political organization, which started setting up a table to provide food and other basic necessities to university students. But after Hurricane Maria, they became a community-based project working towards the eradication of hunger and achieving food sovereignty for Puerto Rico through different solidarity initiatives. I recommend looking them up online. They're on Instagram. You can see what some of the projects that they're involved with. During my study, that was one of the organizations that interviewed. I also interviewed a few Puerto Rican farmers. So Frutos del Guacabo in Manatí is one of them. They're a hydroponic farm, which in reality it's a network of farms that grow the same products using hydroponic systems instead of planting in the soil. Basically, this type of agriculture, you have essentially like PVC pipes, and you carve holes in them, and then you have all the plants and the roots just sitting in there with water, with nutrients going through them. They basically supply local restaurants with a wide variety of produce, including non-traditional lettuces and cabbages, micro sprouts, and they have edible flowers, just to mention a few. I tried some of them. One of them was this yellow flower. Then when you bit into it, it felt like lightning was going off in your mouth. Very cool. Their goal is to stimulate the local farm to table gastronomy scene. They also have goats from which they derive multiple goat products. I toured their farm. It's super, super cool. Finca Neojíbaro in Rio Grande, which I'm wearing their shirt. They grow more than 26 types of fruits and vegetables and over 100 varieties of tobacco. They use agroecological farming methods. They also have a pizza restaurant, a bar. They offer cooking classes and operate an Airbnb on site, so you can stay at the farm. They also run educational programs where they educate the community on the importance of agriculture. I also interview one of the owners of Huerta Libre in San Sebastian. This is a farm project that practices permaculture, agroforestry, and agroecology. They also run educational workshops. During our interview, they shared how difficult it was for them to acquire this land, a common experience for local and Puerto Rican farmers. Typically, When it comes to agricultural land, it's either owned by the government and they lease it out to farmers through a very like rigorous and discriminatory process, or it's in the hand of private owners, which typically just sell to Americans or other foreigners that come in with a blank check. So what ends up happening is that the terrains that are available to locals that they're able to purchase are usually in El Monte, very remote locations without access to power, water. There's no roads, or the few roads that are there have been completely overgrown. These typically used to be either coffee plantations or most cases sugarcane plantations, which means that the soil is completely eroded. So these farms require a lot of investment and a lot of work before they can even get started. Just to throw another example that's very well known, Josco Bravo. That's another well-known farm. They do a lot of great stuff. And yeah, there's other farm projects being started all over Puerto Rico. They're either completely organic or agroecological, as well as your more traditional monoculture projects. So, I mean, the information I've shared barely scratches the surface of what these projects are about. And my interviews. So I encourage everyone to look them up online or search Puerto Rico agritourism, and you'll find some of them there. The Puerto Rico Tourism Company on their website has a section for agritourism, which a lot of these farms, this is how I found out about them. Obviously, for farming is very hard to break even or like have a profit from it, especially when they're starting out. So a lot of them have resorted to agritourism, which means that you can go visit them, go on tours, purchase products from them, or even if you're abroad and can't make it, you can donate money to them. Again, while their main goal is food production, the reality is that it's very expensive to operate a farm, especially when they're growing organic. So they have to explore other avenues of income to support the agricultural projects. Uh, but there's a lot of barriers to for that Puerto Rican farmers face. You know, as this was mentioned by everyone that I spoke with, the government of Puerto Rico makes it impossible for local farmers to like get projects going, especially if they're agroecological and they're not your traditional monocultural project. Uh, they deem anything that's agroecological or outside of like what they consider traditional farming to be not profitable. So they normally do not grant those leases. There's a great documentary called Seremos la Dueña de la Tierra that details this in depth. So I recommend it to everyone. The Josco Bravo, which I mentioned earlier, is featured on this documentary, as well as two other farmers. Uh, but this takes us back to this colonial mentality, right? Which favors large scale monoculture that uses synthetic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers uh, um, to grow food at large scale, large quantities, you know. Um, think of like the large farms in the United States of like what, like you mentioned, corn, right? Which they go ahead and dump on other countries. So this is like the idea of farming for that the Puerto Rican government needs to break from, you know, like break from this colonial mindset and colonial agricultural practices, which are the ones that proliferated after the Green Revolution brought about the invention of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides in the 50s. And we know how harmful this has been to the environment. And it's one of the main drivers of climate change. You know, like agricultural runoff of pesticide and fertilizer, which ends up in the ocean, is the main driver for algae blooms, right? Or like salgazo, which affects Puerto Rico. So the government of Puerto Rico, they've also been incentivizing farmers to grow commodity crops like coffee. They're seeking to reinvigorate this industry that was based on colonial extraction, which was romanticized over time. And while I'm not against incentivizing such projects, I love coffee myself. But the government needs to put as much effort into developing and supporting farms that are growing actual food. But there's also a need to educate the population on why some of these foods are more expensive than what is found at the supermarket, and why local agroecological projects are better for their health and the Puerto Rican economy by contributing to a circular economy where the money stays in Puerto Rico. we're buying from Puerto Rican growers, right? And that money's going back to them, which they can invest in their farms, right? Helping them hire more local people, which brings the cost of food down, allows them to like grow more food, you know? And then another advantage of agroecological projects that people are not aware of is that once established, these projects are going to produce a wider, more diverse variety of foods. It will give us higher yields. And since they're in harmony with the environment, they're much more resilient to hurricanes and the effects of climate change. You know, they're also more resilient to the crop loss that we see from disease and other ailments that would otherwise decimate entire monocultures.
Yeah, thank you for all, this is all great information. I encourage everybody to check out a lot of these organizations and farms, NPR. I have had the privilege of, visiting some of these places. One of them that, just on the note about monoculture, I was stayed in 2019 in a place, Finca Gripiñas, outside Jayuya. And there, I remember there was this coffee farm on the mountaintop across the way. Like it was like the next farm over, and they were monoculture coffee. And you could literally see the soil was like from across the valley was like a different color than the farm that I was staying on, which was more like a biodynamic farm. They grew like a bunch of different stuff. It was tree covered. There was a diverse amount of plants. The soil looked like soil. And I'm not going to sit here and say like I'm an expert in like soil science, but even as like the average person, you could just see it, be like, that definitely doesn't look natural. Also, the land looks completely eroded and way more vulnerable to like heavy rainstorms, flooding, and things like that. So not only was it not healthy for the plants and the local ecosystem, but you're also putting your crops at risk by using that system. Um,
Yeah, no, one thing about soil, and I'm glad that you brought it up, is that Puerto Rico has some of the best soil for agriculture. It has all of the what's considered the best type of soils to grow food. Most places only have a handful of them. You know, I'm not an expert either, but there's plenty of information on this, and we're wasting the richness of that soil on monocultures or allowing foreign farmers to grow mangoes to send to Israel or other places, you know, or what we're seeing with the local government, which is something that I forgot to mention before, is that they're selling off agricultural land to individuals and foreigners that are setting up massive solar panel projects, right, on land that could go to agriculture when you can put those solar panels on rooftops instead. You know, so it's kind of like this vicious cycle of like we have the land and we have the means to be food to support ourselves, you know, and feed ourselves, but the government of Puerto Rico is prioritizing all these other projects based on a colonial mentality.
all right, so Julio, final question of this series of part three. What would independence do for the agriculture industry on the island from both an economic and a cultural perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I think independence will be huge for local agriculture. I've already touched up on some of the benefits of supporting and growing local fruit projects uh, under being like a colony, right? While being a colony, but all of these benefits will hopefully increase due to independence, as well as the government handles the transition well, which I'm sure they would. But from an economic perspective, it would basically allow us to build a local agricultural industry that was decimated pre-colonialism. You know, it will allow us to build an industry that will not only feed Puerto Rico, but support this circular economy that would incentivize our local farmers. It would incentivize more people into going into agriculture. It will bring back, for example, like the egg and chicken industries, which were lost to American imports, which will make purchasing food on the island in general more affordable. And even if we have to import food, at that point, we can import from other countries, which the food quality is not only going to be better, but we wouldn't have to pay the additional millions of dollars, you know, that we pay due to the Jones Act. Now, from a cultural perspective, it will reconnect Puerto Ricans with the land, right? Bring us closer to the food that we eat, the process of growing food. It will help us appreciate it more. I mean, most of our grandparents grew a bit of food in their backyard. This is something that's been lost with the younger generations. I mean, yeah, we have less access to land, but like we're under colonialism in the past 20 years. Puerto Rico it's become a culture of consumption, you know, work, buy, you know, and we've just kind of like lost that connection to the land and the food that we grow. It would help us reclaim our local diet of not only culturally appropriate foods, but the foods that our ancestors grew, which were resilient to our climate. Think of like tubers like yuca, ñame, other viandas that younger generations no longer eat, but the reason why they were grown by our ancestors is because they're not harmed when hurricanes come through, right? Like they grow underground, so the hurricanes can't rip them out of the ground like they do with some other food that is grown there. And yeah, independence in general would allow us to break from this dependence on harmful and low quality American food imports, and will bring us closer to achieving this food sovereignty that it is so important for an island, particularly as climate change gets worse.
Julio, this was an amazing series. I learned a lot. I hope our audience learned a lot. We really, really, really appreciate your expertise on this, and we encourage everybody who's watching to go check out some of those amazing organizations that we mentioned in part three. And you know, really just working towards a brighter future for food in Puerto Rico. So thank you very much, Julio.
Yeah, no, it was great. And like I mentioned in one of the other videos, like all of this information barely scratches the surface. So I encourage everyone to do their own research, go out and support these farms, like educate yourself on these topics. Uh, don't simply just take it from my mouth, just do the work, and then you'll be more likely and more willing to contribute towards a better Puerto Rico and the food sovereignty of our island and the decolonization, which is the work that we're trying to do.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.